Welcome to EPM Provides Agility and Speed Amid Constant Disruption. My name is Edward Roske. I'm CEO here at Argano Interrel. Our mission at Argano Interrel is to leave the world a smarter place than we found it. Across all of Argano, we're trying to fulfill the promise of the digital renaissance for all. We are in a time of rapid change, rapid transformation. And when it comes to EPM and analytics, which is Interrel's specialty, we hope you can take all of your information, take all of your data, use that to make some good actions across your company, and hopefully we'll leave you smarter than we found you. You believe your organization smarter than you found it. For anyone that doesn't know about Interrel, this is not a commercial. I will just tell you 2 or 3 facts. We are Oracle's 5-time EPM and Analytics Partner of the Year. We were actually founded back in 1997. If you actually go back almost 25 years, we were created to be an S-based consulting firm to help people free data that was trapped in spreadsheets. And ever since then, we have been helping companies break out of historical patterns. Spreadsheets have not been around for all of time, even though we kind of think they have. There were times when data was trapped in databases or trapped in general ledgers. And before that, it was trapped on paper, trapped in mainframes. What we've been doing since our founding is as each new change happens, each new generation, each new renaissance, if you will, we've helped people free that information. And what tends to happen is people live with their historical ways of doing things until there is a sudden change, either a change to their industry, a change to their company, change to themselves, maybe a change in leadership. There tend to be big, massive disruptions. And sometimes they come in waves. If you go back to the dot-com boom of about 20 years ago, there was a world where people said information shouldn't just be kept within my company. We should be able to share information, see information, go out and be able to access it no matter where it is in the world, not just contained in our own systems. If you go back to 10, 12 years ago, at the time of the Great Recession, we entered a world where data became extremely valuable, and knowing where we were, what was our liquidity, what is our cash flow became absolutely critical. If you want to advance to, the current pandemic, we had yet another wave of disruption that spanned all industries, all companies, all of our personal lives. COVID-19 has forced us to go, what got us to 2020 isn't going to get us to 2030. So just like this happened in around 2000, like it happened in around 2010, like it happened again in 2020, we've had to examine ourselves and say, are we viable going forward? Not are we viable at the moment, but is our company, our processes, our systems, our technologies, our solutions, is this viable for our corporation and all of our people launching into the future? And it's important to realize COVID-19 didn't just disrupt the economy. It sorted businesses into 2 different categories. Some of those companies went into the category, we'll call it long-term viability. These are the ones that adapted with this astonishing ease, and they pivoted because their systems allowed them to. They had speed, they had agility, they were able to solve those unprecedented problems. The rest of those companies, they found themselves swimming in this murky, uncertain world. We had a lot of clients, some of which had been with us since the 90s, and they had been making minimal increments. If you look at how they budgeted in 2020, even though they knew they should be doing things like scenario planning and strategic planning and integrated business planning and robotic process automation and continuous close, they really, if you looked, yes, the technology had changed a bit, maybe it had gone to the cloud, but it really hadn't changed the process. It hadn't changed the mindset. So those companies assumed the world was going to keep changing fairly slowly. And that's kind of the second category. These companies with these outdated FP&A, let's just call them solutions, meaning the system, the process, the people. These companies with these outdated FP&A solutions just kind of hoped maybe it'll all go away soon. The world's going to return to normal. And what we found is without the right enterprise performance management EPM tools, without the right expertise, they didn't have the information they needed to keep moving ahead. Even when they developed these potential solutions and said, well, we modeled in our Excel spreadsheet, or we took our old once-a-year budget, we tried to figure out a way to do a really fast updated forecast, they were just riddled with doubt. Now, they knew that this was a critical time, 2020 and 2021. They knew how costly those missteps would be. And they also knew that without these well-integrated, fast-moving, easy-to-change EPM solutions, their forecasts were only partially reliable. And what it did is it paralyzed some organizations, because they said, well, I know this is what the numbers say, but do I really believe them? And they were paralyzed with indecision. What happened to those companies that were paralyzed with indecision? Hold on, the screen messed up. It was going to be extremely dramatic. What happened to those companies that were paralyzed with indecision? A lot of them aren't around anymore. This is just a sampling of $1 billion+ bankruptcies just in the United States, just in 2020. If you look at how many companies went bankrupt last year, it was a record high. And if you look at why they were going bankrupt, many cited pandemic-related factors. Now, what does that mean? Are they saying, well, I wasn't able to deal with the drop in my market? Well, there was a time when they didn't need a massive, countrywide booming market. There was a time when they could operate at a much smaller size and a much smaller scale, but they were able to grow over years and years and years. And when the world changed, they weren't able to shrink, contract, and control costs, manage profitability just as fast as they kept expanding. So if you look at those companies, there were some that frankly were on wobbly foundations. Before the world became unhinged, they were getting by in some cases because they were extremely large, in some cases because they've been around for a really long time. They weren't making the hard decisions. What happened though is that COVID-19 shoved them off the cliff. There was this inability to change course, and it essentially shot them, put them in the coffin, and then put the nail in the coffin. So what happened was you saw organizations that had been around for literally 100+ years, and all of a sudden their fate was sealed. Just lost profits, lost customers, lost jobs. Now, some of those organizations just needed to be protected from their creditors and said, as soon as the world opens back up again, we're going to be fine. But the majority of them said, this is not a one-time thing, because simply COVID was not the last. It was not the final disruption we're going to face. And it's not necessarily going to be 10 more years until that next disruption. About every 10 years, we see a disruption that spans all industries and all people. But all of our individual industries, all of our individual companies are going to be changed, because we are in a tightly connected world. All it takes is one ship spinning sideways, or one person eating something they shouldn't at a wet market, or however the heck COVID got out. Next thing you know, we have a global impact and the world suddenly changes. We need to plan not for the specific disruption. We don't need to have a scenario out there called COVID-21. What happens if there's another COVID this year? We need to plan for what happens if the world fundamentally changes. And we need to be able to spit that scenario out really quickly, because one thing is guaranteed: there will be future disruptions. And we have to prepare for them by looking at these companies that survived, the companies that thrived, and we have to use their knowledge, their pathway to advise our own future. So what did those companies, the ones that didn't go bankrupt, the ones that did remarkably well, what tools did they use? Now, there were plenty of examples about how companies leaned into agility as they never have before, how companies did quick pivots to respond to their supply chain being in upheaval, their workforces being terrified, the increasing digital demands from customers. But what we discovered is that while organizations have been using enterprise performance management, EPM software, to various different degrees for decades, only the most forward-thinking, not just the survivors, but the thrivers, were leveraging that EPM engine to derive the necessary horsepower from their data, to help them make agile, nimble decisions in the moment. Because companies that were able to pivot quickly, they had these modern EPM processes in place. They had the tools, they had the expertise. It empowered them to not only quickly assess their current financial situation, they were able to plan, they were able to budget, they were able to spit out all kinds of various scenarios that could potentially play out. We even coined a term last year. We called it uncertainty planning, because not one of these organizations knew what was going to happen, but they knew that it was going to be uncertain, and uncertain within a pretty probable range. We could have a quickly recovering situation. We could have a long-term impact. We could have a U-shaped recession, but we took all these and said, whichever scenario happens, we're able to respond to it. So some of those organizations that went bankrupt, they didn't have a scenario called, what if this thing extends beyond a month? Speed and agility are not just a value add during times of disruption, they're necessities whenever the world is in massive upheaval. Give an example of an organization that we look back on as just being stellar throughout the entire pandemic. Amazon. Amazon was able to pivot to being more fast, being more agile. They had FP&A processes, and they were able to pinpoint where they should adapt quickly. I don't know if you all remember this, but if you rewind the clock to March of last year, we were not getting deliveries of groceries from Amazon in an hour or two. It was days wait to get anything from Amazon, to the point that Amazon had to start prioritizing grocery deliveries and down prioritizing books, their traditional backbone, books, non-essential materials, to the point where those would actually take weeks. But then they looked at their model and they said, is there a way where we can innovate? We can take advantage of this opportunity to just rethink anything. What would the benefit be to our customers? What would the benefit be to our employees? What would the financial benefit be across all of Amazon? So Amazon didn't have a scenario titled, what happens if all of a sudden the world requires online delivery? That it is not a nice to have, but we have to do it immediately for everything that we need. They didn't have that scenario. So what they did is they quickly changed from apology emails, we're sorry we're not meeting your standards. It changed from unavailable delivery time slots to an organization with a market cap around $2 trillion US. How was it able to pivot this quickly? It's because it was able to understand all of that financial data, all the changes that were coming in. It was able to make replans. It was able to reconsolidate their information. It was able to make decisions in real time about what people were caring about and what they were willing to be a little slower about. But I'll give you an example you might not know, and this is Toyota. Now, I don't know if you have tried to buy a car lately, but at a lot of organizations, if you go to a Ford lot or you go to a GM lot, it's pretty much empty. If you see a car, you don't get to choose the color. You don't get to choose, oh, well, I would like, the sunroof, or I would like the moonroof. You pretty much choose what's on the lot, and it's generally not the car you want. That's all that's available. The reason for that has to do with a lot of part shortages. Quite often, the chips that go into various things are in short supply. But there's one car company that isn't running out. Now, they don't have months and months of supply, because if you don't find something at Ford or whatever, Chevy, you're probably heading to this company. And that organization is Toyota. Toyota saw patterns in its reporting, and it said, how can I use that data to outperform my competitors? Well, you might go, okay, what data did they have on a pandemic? What did they do differently? Well, they actually had data going back, decades, and they said, what did we do wrong and what did we do right the last time the world shut down and no one bought cars? Now, there hasn't been that exact situation, but there was something very similar. In 2011, again, about 10 years ago, there was a massive earthquake near Fukushima. Took a lot of lives, damaged a lot of property, caused a nuclear meltdown due to the earthquake and the subsequent tsunami. And they did all their analysis. What happened was nobody was really buying cars at the time. They were terrified and dealing with other things. And they came up with a plan back in 2007. And they said, well, based on real-time inventory, getting things in, just-in-time inventory, getting things in just when we need them, we think it's probably going to be required 6 months out. What happened was it came back far faster than they expected. As fast as it slowed down, it came back just as quickly. There was a period where no one was buying anything, but when it started fast. So Toyota made a decision. They said, we think this is what's going to happen in 2020, 2021. So we are going to stockpile the things that we're going to ditch just-in-time inventory, and we're going to stockpile the things that are likely to have supply chain bottlenecks, so that when we see the world start coming back up, we can get our factories ramped up as quickly as possible, because we know people are going to want our cars. How did this play out? Toyota's factories are now running at 90% capacity. Their average auto competitor is 50 to 60%. So what they did is they looked to the past. So the past is not irrelevant. We don't have to just look forward, but they looked to the past to plan for a future and said, how can we be agile? How can we embrace these opportunities when they come up? For the first time in history, Toyota actually sold more cars in the second quarter of 2021 than General Motors did. These companies, these thrivers, if you will, these ones who were able to outlast the disruption and survive and take advantage of those opportunities, what they were doing is they were utilizing EPM. They were saying, how can we look to the past to flexibly plan for the future? How do we, as I said earlier, get that necessary horsepower from our financial data? Well, there were a few things that they did. Few questions they asked themselves. I've compiled it into a list of 5, and I'll walk you through them. First question, they said, is let's ask ourselves, what scenarios are possible? So in your company, your organization, do you plan for just one future? Do you plan for just one budget number? Or maybe you revise, have just one forecast? Or are you realizing the world is more uncertain than that? Are you doing uncertainty planning? Are you planning for future scenarios? Not just one scenario, but future scenarios. Are you planning for a specific number? Are you planning for a range of numbers? Now, Nostradamus be damned, no one can accurately predict the future. So what we have to do is prepare for the most likely outcomes, and there will be multiple. Now you might say, but there are an infinite number of possibilities, Edward. Sure. One possibility, Interroll tomorrow might suddenly buy the Texas Rangers and beat the New York Yankees, and the Rangers somehow make the World Series. The odds of that are nil. The Rangers are an absolutely horrendous team. Interroll doesn't do baseball, and there's no way to turn that team around anytime short. So planning that financial scenario out makes absolutely no sense. But if I said, well, we have a situation that there might be another variant after Delta that requires the world to shut down. We might be bending the curve again, and the world is opening back up. We might have financial stimulus. There might be inflation rising. There might be inflation decreasing. Those are realistic scenarios. So my normal advice is figure out what scenarios are possible, narrow it down to what scenarios are realistic, and then don't just convert those to numbers. Convert them to actions. Ask yourself, how will we deal with those scenarios if they actually occur? So given several, let's make the math easy, let's say 3 to 5. So given 3 to 5 plausible scenarios, do we have an idea of how we can use whatever happens to our advantage? Second question to ask yourself, what should our strategic plan be given our financial constraints? Just like Interroll doesn't have the money to buy the Rangers, although they can't be worth very much. They're really, really a bad team. But what are our constraints? What are we able to do? And what are we able to do under each individual scenario? What are the assets that we can build on? What are the ones we can benefit from? What are the ones that are going to hurt us? Are we prepared to mitigate the damage? Are we prepared to capitalize on the advantages? So say we had a scenario that said, what if our business increases 30%? What is your plan for how you're going to hire and staff and expand to meet that 30% greater demand? What if your demand is going to decrease 30%? As a plausible possible scenario, what are you going to do to minimize that damage? How are you going to control your spending, manage your costs? Is it going to require really harsh conclusions? Like, are you going to have to make drastic cuts across the organization? Or maybe you should be making those hard decisions now, but you're not because overall you're profitable. So maybe we should start asking ourselves, what actually is making us money in our organization? What's actually losing us money? The key is that once you have that data, can you connect the dots? Do you know what products or locations, what markets to pull out of first if the floor does fall out from under you. It is always better to act too quickly than to act too slowly. Third question to ask yourself, how can we get that right information to the right people at a time when they can use it to make better business decisions faster? Ask yourself right now, we're in the month of September, let's say tomorrow, you lost your biggest customer, you lost your largest region, you had a major shutdown, I don't know, the world goes back into lockdown. When will you get that information to the managers so they can get the data they need to pivot? For a lot of organizations, it's not until sometime in October, and it might even be middle to the late side of October. And because maybe the start of September did really well, we might not even realize the impact by the end of September. Now, by the time we get to October, it's too late to do anything about it. So getting the right information to the right people right now so they can make better decisions faster is critical to our success. And the companies that did this thrived over the last 2 years. It's not just enough to send data, to send a income statement to your cost center manager, your profit center manager. You have to open a constant dialogue back and forth about where your plans, where are the actuals, how are they comparing across each other. So ask yourselves, are we having a back and forth? Or is it more a matter of I'm an FP&A and my job just stops? I send them the income statement, thank gosh, I don't have to talk to them for a really long time. Or is it more a matter of by sending it to them, we can have a good open conversation? Your plans should iterate based on that conversation. Change is the only constant. Don't get so stuck in a fixed budget that you're marching towards a number and not saying, what decisions should I actually be making so that I can modify what those numbers actually are? Be aware of the cost of inaction. Be aware of the consequences of not having that data. There are a whole lot of companies that don't have immediate answers to all 5 of those questions. All those companies are struggling because they're unable to adapt to these post-disruption realities. Now, I'm using COVID not because it's a one-off situation. It's just an example of a long-running pattern. There is always a disruption. As I said at the beginning, we are living in a time of a digital renaissance where people are looking back at the lessons of the past and saying, with the knowledge I now have, what would I do differently? I'll give you an example. In most accounting organizations, we have humans ticking and tying and manually validating data and making sure it all gets rolled up. And yes, it looks good and passing it on to the next person. We did that because it stems from a time when computers weren't able to do that, or getting them to do that was remarkably difficult. Is that still the case? No. We now have things like robotic process automation, where we can say, what if those humans weren't available then? What about the technology I now have? Could I instead have the technology take the manual effort out of these repetitive processes and let the computers do it so the humans can focus on the far more value add type activities? In the future, automation won't just validate your data. Robotic process automation will always get you started. It will not get you finished. But think of your upcoming budget. Well, the best thing to do is to look at the past, come up with some trends, figure out what the future is going to look like, and then start modifying. A computer can do all that up to the point of it's time to start modifying. So in the future, automation, robotic process automation, is going to prepare your first draft of the budget. And it's going to tell you, all other factors being equal, the path we're on, this is what that future is going to look like. So there are a lot of companies out there that didn't understand the value of being fast to change, didn't understand the value of let's take humans out of the part they shouldn't be doing, let's have computers do those. They didn't prioritize financial technology investments, fintech, which if they don't change going forward, they're going to risk falling further behind. Because companies, if you're not doing it, I'll tell you your competitors are. They're making these rapid moves towards adopting robotic process automation. And any type of technology transformation that is available. If you look at it and say, yeah, it's probably not right for me, I guarantee your competition is actually doing it. Now, I gave you some examples of companies that did really well. I gave a general overview of companies that went bankrupt. I'll give you a personal example from one of our clients. Last year, we had been helping a remarkably well-known cruise company, and we had multiple people working on their corporate-wide planning project. We were in the middle of implementing this traditional budget forecasting type implementation in March of 2020. Now, by that point, the World Health Organization, for all their faults, did declare COVID-19 a global pandemic on, I think it was March 11th of last year. I remember it because I was giving a webcast that day on, is COVID-19 going to be declared a global pandemic? I had to quickly revise my slides that morning. So we knew it was going to be a global pandemic in March 11th. The question was how wide was going to go, was going to affect every country, who was going to be hardest hit. But we knew that there was an industry that was already starting to suffer, and that was the cruise industry. So middle of March, we were planning on it. We had an active scenario ready if it occurred. I was not shocked at all when the company called and said, we're canceling your project. Little bit of business 101. Apparently, it is really hard to survive when you have expenses but no revenue. I guess it's not a long-term viable business option. So they said, we're well capitalized. We are not heavily leveraged. We've got good money in the bank, but we can't keep going with a project that really is just taking the old way of doing things and carrying it forward, because it's not going to help us survive. What shocked me though, so that I planned for. I planned on them canceling the project. What I didn't plan for is they decided to redirect those resources that I assumed I was going to be putting on the bench at that point. They said, we'd like to take the people that were working on that global corporate-wide planning project. We want to redirect them to what we consider to be more valuable, immediate efforts. They said, number one, we have to do scenario planning, because we don't know if this thing is going to hit our cruise industry and we're going to be shut down until May or till April, if it's going to be more likely late spring, or if it might extend into the summer. They said, we want to make sure we have strategic modeling, so we understand what are our constraints, what is our viability, what is our cash flow going to look like, and when are we going to have to start making hard decisions, and then how are we going to manage those costs? What will those hard decisions be? How much money will we need to continue operating under all those different scenarios? So they saw the hurricanes coming. Always disrupts the cruise industry. They saw the metaphorical hurricane coming and said, unlike a normal hurricane that really just hits one region like the Caribbean for about a week or two, it's going to be a hurricane that surrounds the globe, and we need to pivot quickly to survive. We put a system in place, actually had it in place in 30 days, and they ran a scenario that said, what if this thing extends into the summer? And they said, we'll be able to survive, and we will actually outlast our competition. We'll come out of it with a higher stock price than our competition, but it's going to require us actually selling several of our ships if we go into that situation. Well, we all know that's what happened. They survived the pandemic. As the travel world is beginning to normalize, they're back to delivering amazing vacation experiences. I was actually on one of their cruise ships in August. I was there for 2 weeks, sailing around the Greek islands, and they not only survived the pandemic, they figured out how to pivot their entire experience on board the ship. 100% of the ship was vaccinated. I mean, 100% of the crew, 100% of the staff. You had to take 2 COVID tests before you ever got on the ship. You had to take a COVID test every single week that you were on the ship, because they knew that's what it would take to give themselves confidence that they were keeping people safe and give people confidence to actually be back on having one of those memorable vacation experiences. Here's the critical thing. They now have a system. So whatever storms come next, could be an extreme weather event, could be climate change affecting around the world. It could be an economic meltdown, could be a change, I don't know, in investments or taxation or something like that. They know they'll be able to weather that storm. So at Interrel, Argano Interrel, just like our clients, we know that businesses have to do a whole lot more than just tweak those business systems of the past. We have to rethink the Renaissance. So just like the Renaissance looked at antiquity and said, from those great thinkers of old, or great artists, or great architects, or great scientists, what could we now do with that, the knowledge we have to redo what they did? We have to look back at the Renaissance. We have to look back at those thinkers of old. In some cases, thinkers of old are only 10 years old, and say, what did they learn from 2010? What lessons have we learned over the last 10 years? And using that information and the amazing artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, robotic automation, the awareness that the world is not headed down one path, but it's headed down multiple paths. How can we use that information to rethink everything across our business? To do this, we can't just stop at the surface. We can't say, oh, we took your spreadsheet and we lifted it to the cloud. That is surface transformation. That is technically a digital transformation. You went from a on-prem world to a slightly more digital distributed world. That is not deep transformation. Deep transformation will allow an organization to adapt with speed, to adapt with agility. I'll tell you, I've had a whole lot of conversations with C-level executives over the last year and a half. I thank God for Zoom and Zoom-like technologies, because I was able to meet in some cases with 3, 4, 5 different CFOs in the same day. Trying to fly around would have been impossible. The conversations that we were having is when I was talking with the CFOs, they said, yeah, we may have survived this one. And in some cases, they didn't have good EPM systems. In some cases, they did it by blood, sweat, toil, tears, and Excel. They survived by willpower, people power, Excel power, and they don't want to do that going forward. Now, don't get me wrong, the C-suite, speaking as a CEO myself, we appreciate elbow grease. We don't want to rely on it with everything on the line. CFOs don't want to have their people working 100-hour weeks just trying to get the newest scenario updated. Now, what has happened just in the last year and a half is a major shift in FP&A's role. Going into 2020, 2021, this was already starting to happen. It was happening very slowly. COVID just shoved it forward. And that's that FP&A's role going into last year was frankly pretty backwards looking. It was steering in the rear view mirror. It was not focusing on the road ahead. It was saying, what happened in the last month? What happened in the last quarter? Based on the budget we did last year, what's the budget going to look like for next year? Based on actuals last year, what's the budget going to look like for next year? Which is kind of like saying, well, based on the fact that I don't see any cars behind me, there must not be any cars in front of me. And you find yourself slamming into a car, going back to a cruise ship metaphor, slamming into an iceberg. So the role of FP&A has pivoted from being no longer backward looking, they are now forward looking. They're saying, what does that future actually look like? Now, to be forward looking, we still have to do the production of the income statements, the balance sheets, the operating statements, the cash flows, but we're doing that in an automated fashion. So EPM now has the ability to take over those, frankly, not terribly interesting things, the backward looking, the boring, the tedious tasks. It can take all of those over so we can focus on changing things. Because computers are really, really good at looking backward. They're really good at looking for patterns. But if you go into late March of 2020, we were already seeing an economic decrease. Our recession actually started in Q1 of last year, extended dramatically by 30+% drop into Q2, but it didn't just start in Q2, it started in Q1. Well, the computers were looking at that and saying, that is a temporary anomaly. We have to assume regression to the mean. We've got to assume it's going to pick back up. So they assumed a temporary blip. Smarter people were looking at that and going, what if it doesn't end by Easter? What if there's actually a big impact and the numbers keep trending actually downward? So what EPM does is it will automate the consolidation of the information, the finding your intercompanies, generating your reports, issuing that information out. It will even get at the point of coming up with what it thinks the budget and forecasts are going to look like, but then humans have to come in. They have to step in and go, does this actually make sense based on the outside world? As FP&A's role has changed from being a company that just does boring, tedious, closing the books, doing some financial analysis, distributing out a little bit of trend analysis, it's changed from an income statement being a report nobody knows quite what to do with, to an income statement being something that drives a physical action. I've said many times over the last 20 years, no report no analysis should do anything other than two things. It should either lead to a deeper question or it should lead to a physical action. Well, sadly, income statements are not optimized to do either of those things. Income statements are actually designed to see if the numbers foot. The fundamental format of an income statement hasn't changed in 100 years. It's really hard to look at an income statement and go, what are the three things I need to go do right now? So what is happening is FP&A, rather than just hand someone an income statement and go, hey, FP&A or accounting cost center manager, you go figure out what your action should be. Their role is starting to overlap. And I think it's in that dialogue I was talking about before, where they're saying, hey, I've done the analysis of your income statement. I know the thing is horribly formatted. Yes, it looks pretty, but it's hard to find any detail in this thing. And here are three numbers you should go focus on immediately. And that information will then enable the people receiving that income statement to actually go do what they got their degrees in, to let them use their higher level functioning. They can look at the reports, look at the analysis, look at those three things that are going to get them promoted or the five things that are going to get them fired today. They can take those higher level skills they were trained for, and they can go out and take a physical action. They can make a difference going forward. We have gone from a world where FP&A is an afterthought, where FP&A and EPM are a nice to have, and we've entered the world where they're critical. Companies that are succeeding, that actually want to thrive in this change that is coming, that is going to only be coming faster, we have to have these agile systems. I'll give you some advice. I'm looking at our many people on this today, and I see a lot of people from FP&A. And I'll give you some free advice. If you define your job as being someone who does the same thing on a given day every single month, you will be automated out of a job. You have to adopt those higher level skills. You have to be the ones who are driving those physical actions. Those skills that you have as people are essential to you. They're essential to your organization. They're essential to the entire company. If you have the ability to go drive physical action, if your company is somebody who can take advantage of that data and drives physical action, you and your company will be leading in the digital renaissance. As I said before, in Argano, we are trying to leave the world a smarter place than we found it. We're trying to help you take data, make good decisions, and saying, yeah, I can actually put this information to use. And that's part of Argano's overall mission, which is fulfilling the promise of the digital renaissance for all. Now, I will say there is a great promise for those who want to go out and grab it. There is just as much a concern for the people that don't know how to deal with disruption. They don't know how to plan for uncertainty. We have to have the ability to quickly pivot. And those who can pivot, think of it this way. Your ability to turn, your ability to go really fast or go really slow is not as important in the digital renaissance as your ability to accelerate and your ability to decelerate, or as my physics friend would tell me, negatively accelerate. So accelerate and decelerate, because if you can accelerate really quickly, you can go to a high speed, but if all of a sudden there's a curve in the road ahead, you can decelerate and slow back down again. If you want to survive in the digital renaissance, you have to take advantage of opportunities when they come, and when the world smashes you in the face, you have to have the ability to slow down again and make those strong decisions. What powers all that? It's enterprise performance management. It gives you the ability to figure out what's coming, figure out when you should start slowing down based on where that road is turning, or there's fog ahead, there's something that's going to slow you down. Figure out when that's going to be a straightaway and you can accelerate. EPM gives you the ability to proactively and quickly plan and adapt for that future. If you can pivot quickly, if you can accelerate, if you can make changes, if you can be aware that the road might go straight, it might go left, or it might go right, it might suddenly disappear off a cliff, and you have plans for all those, you will not only pivot quickly, you will not only survive, you are going to thrive. The world is going to be changing rapidly going forward. We have to understand the value of information, the value of exposing this data to everybody who might need it. The simple truth is, well, if I may quote Littlefinger from Game of Thrones, we'll see how well this works.
And which truth is that?
Knowledge is power.
Thank you. Yes, Littlefinger, knowledge is power. If you have, as true as far as it got him in the entire Game of Thrones show, I will leave it at that, spoiler alert. Knowledge is power. I think I even learned this from Schoolhouse Rock back in the 1980s. As true as it was in the 80s, as true it wasn't during the seven seasons of Game of Thrones, it's even more true to reality. It's true to all of our businesses. We have to go take this information, we have to share it, we have to open up a dialogue. My job, my role here at Interrel is not CEO as it relates to all of you. It's to take this knowledge and share it. And one of the things that we believe in is trying to take all that information, carry it to as many people as possible. So in the spirit of knowledge being power, we have several educational events come up. So next week, you'll actually get to hear an interview with me. So if you're tired of my voice, you might want to skip next week. But if you want to hear me deep dive about a real world example, join me as I'm going to talk to Russ Story. Russ is the former lead over all of FedEx's EPM projects. And we're going to talk, I'm going to be interviewing Russ about their EPM journey to the cloud and what it meant to them and how it made them more able to survive and thrive during the last couple of years. That following day, I'm going to be speaking again. Wow, apparently it's going to be like Edward week. I will be one of the speakers because we're hosting the first in a 4-part series focusing on how integrated business planning helps organizations align their sales, their finance, and their supply chain. Now, officially, it is part of our manufacturing series. We're doing several industry-specific series. That's one of them that we're doing is on manufacturing. It might be of interest to people outside the manufacturing area, though. So please go out and check it out. See if it might be something of interest to you. If you want to hear about integrated business planning, you want to hear about maybe combining supply chain planning with financial planning, what that might look like. Please join me on the 23rd. We have some other great guest speakers lined up. It's actually a couple hours. We're going to get together on the 23rd. And on the heels of Oracle's some recent really cool changes in freeform apps inside of Cloud EPM, we're going to host an educational session on what it is, how it helps. Fundamentally, it's unlimited data, unlimited dimensionality. Think about it as Essbase in a box available through the power of Oracle Cloud EPM. And on 11, 2 and 3, so November 2nd and 3rd, as we kick off November, we are going to, drumroll please, we're giving you Hyperion solutions again. So just like we did last year when the world was shutting down and all the in-person conferences were being canceled, we decided last year to bring the Oracle EPM and Analytics community together, brought together virtually. We had nearly 1,500 attendees. Last year, we did it over 4 days. We are trying to be cognizant of Zoom fatigue. It is a real thing. So we still want to bring people together. We want to provide meaningful, informative content, but we're condensing the 4 days down to 2 days. Going to be focused really heavily on EPM Essbase Analytics updates on kind of the Tuesday. So we're covering financial close, planning, some of the more emerging kind of products that some of you might not be familiar with, and Essbase, that's on November 2nd. November 3rd, we're doing an industry pivot. We're going to be talking about real world customer examples, industry case studies, focused on how organizations have made the most of their financial reporting solutions. So save the dates. We'll be sending more information in the weeks to come. It's free. So for anybody that didn't attend last year, there's no charge for this at all. It's just pure information. It's my opportunity to just give something back to the community that I know and love, that I've been a part of for 25 plus years. Let's leave out of it the year I first started doing Essbase. Suffice to say, I had no gray beard back when all this began. So save the dates, lock down November 2nd and 3rd, and I look forward to seeing all of you back here then. I hope you've learned something about how EPM can make your company more agile, how it can help speed up. The key thing I want you to remember is that this is not a disruption that will go away. If you assume that there will be nothing like this going forward in the next few years, you're going to end up like those people on that bankruptcy slide. If you want to survive, you have to go not how can I take my current processes and slightly tweak them. You're going to have to go with the knowledge I now have in this digital renaissance. How could I redesign these from scratch to make sure my processes are inherently agile and inherently speedy? Thank you for joining me for the last 45 minutes. I really appreciate the time out of all of your week. I hope to see you a whole lot over the next few weeks. Everyone, thank you. Have an amazing rest of your week.